Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We are delighted to be here with you today. This panel on the planet, and the exact name is Taking Care of Each Other. And I can't think of anything more important than this topic. I'm here in Washington, D.C. I'm a general and forensic psychiatrist, and I breathe in Washington air every day, the good, the bad, the mediocre. And I know that you from all over the world have been participating in vicariously or directly in all of the things that happen here and the trickle down or stream down impacts. Today, we want to talk to you a little bit about the sense of purpose that we can have in what we're doing, and what could be more compelling and give us more meaning in life than taking care of each other, and especially our Mother Earth, Mother Nature, who is the progenitor of all that we do, and whom we know wants us to work with her, not the masters of the universe that we think we are, but rather the collaborators. And so I won't talk about the fires and the floods and the high temperatures and all the things that you already know about. What I want to talk about today, and especially give others the chance to talk about today, is what gives them a sense of taking care of the planet, gives them meaning and purpose. And we hope that you as the audience will not only jump in with questions, but that whatever is left unsaid today is something that motivates you, that infuses you with the excitement of running with ideas on your own. The concept of distributed leadership, one which very smart psychologist in the UK has sort of coined, Ro Randall, or rather Paul Haggett, I should give, they both, I guess, came up with this sense. But the meaning behind distributed leadership is that all of us are important. And as somebody once said, nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And this is what we want to highlight today, want to bring you in, get you feeling as if we're all together on this, and that it is essentially a collaboration that is critical, we know, for our own survival. We're at a crossroads, and bringing the best of all of us together. Sometimes people say, oh, what one person does individually doesn't matter, but it sure does, because it's counted collectively, just like votes on election day. It's not one voice, it's all of our voices together. So I will now move to our illustrious panel, all very successful people. They're chatty, they're full of good life and energy. And I find them almost uniformly, and in any time I've been with them at least, contagiously interested in what we can do. So I hope that they bring that to you, and that you take the chance to talk a little bit about what questions you might have of them. And again, run with all the good things that you are probably already doing with even greater enthusiasm. So I will start from on my screen from left to right. Some of you may recognize his name, Rich Louv. He is the person who coined the term the nature deficit disorder, and I'll say that Al Gore, when I said that term in front of him, snapped his head to attention many, many years ago. So Rich, you've got many, many admirers. Rich is an author, the person who began the Child and Nature Network. Rich, introduce yourself, tell the audience what brings you to this place here today.
Well, I was actually a kid once, and I spent a lot of time in the woods with my dog, and my parents often did not know where I was, but my dog always did. And I found something in those woods that were bigger than what I watched on television. They were bigger than my parents and their problems. But I was lucky because I had parents who loved nature and connected me to it. Over time, I saw that working in the garden with my father, and walking in the woods with him sometimes and going fishing, that for our family, those were the good times. And I grew up, I kind of make a confession in one of these books behind me that I'm shamelessly promoting. I make a confession in the Nature Principle, one of these 4 books, that I have a bias. My bias is that nature connection is connected to health, and maybe particularly mental health. Because as a kid, I watched the impact of nature on my family and on my father. And we moved at one point when I was in 6th grade, I think, to a more affluent neighborhood. The woods were not behind the house directly. My father stopped fishing for a while, for a long time. The diagnosis is unclear, but he had a problem. And his dream was to move to the Ozarks, our family, and fish all day on Table Rock Lake. And they built a house and they did that. But by that time, it was too late. My father never left the kitchen table, and he did not have a happy ending. So I confess that bias because I saw the impact of nature. When we were in nature, he was a different guy. When we had a lot of time in nature as a family, we were a different family. So much of the motivation of these books is that I can't stand the idea that children and future generations, including this one, will grow up without that connection to nature, will grow up without the sanity and the largeness that they can have in the woods or at the beach or next to a creek. And nobody wants to be in the last generation where it's considered normal and expected for children to go outside and lie down in the grass and watch the clouds move. And nobody wants that to be in that generation. And we're in danger of seeing that happen. So that's what these books in part are about. And the Children in Nature Network is the nonprofit that grew out of Last Child in the Woods. And it has a research library for anybody who's interested in the current research. It's gone from about 60 studies when I wrote Last Child in the Woods to over 1,000 studies. And they all point in the same direction, which is this is pretty fundamental to child development, to human development throughout our lives. And because it's so fundamental, I've argued that this should be considered a human right.
Thank you, Rich. I'll just speak for all of us in saying that nothing touches us so much as having the confidence of someone revealing something very personal and telling us that you trust us with this. And I'm sure that all of us have these very personal stories that explain why we're here today. So thank you very much for trusting us, and we will run with that inspiring story. Thank you. Now I'll move on to Fan. I hope it's okay if I call you Fan. Fan is the Chief Medical Officer of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And Fan has come into my life just recently and has just been such a wonderful presence, grounding people who had disparate ideas, bringing us together, being dependable and helpful, and bringing us round always to the task at hand. So I'll turn it over to Fan to talk about, I know many of the things that interest her, but maybe you will select what's most interesting to share, Fan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. So kind. Thank you for saying that. First of all, it's a privilege to be with you all, this panel, but all of you today. And it's a privilege to talk about children's health and well-being and how that fits into these conversations. So you've heard me say in the past, some of you, certainly not all of you, it's all about the children. It's all about the children. Now, what on earth would you expect me to say? accept that as a pediatrician. But that's what I'm going to bring in. I know we all know that. I think we believe it. It's all about the children. And when we're talking about here was one of the quotes in the introduction, let's make climate personal. What's more personal than your children and your family? Children, you know this. Children are the most vulnerable with respect to climate change. And we could spend a lot of time. Physiologically, children are not little adults. They are not. They breathe faster. If you know this, if you have a toddler, they put things in their mouth that shouldn't go there. they respond differently to heat. And we could go on that. That's not exactly what we're talking about today, but that's a piece of it. And I just like to say for all of us, it's an understatement to say it's been a hard year this past year. We talk about converging pandemics, right, of COVID and racism and the economy and climate change, all of those things. And at a time when we've been forced to be really physically and socially distanced, we need each other more than ever. So we'll be talking about some of the mental health issues that children and adults are facing, right? Theopia and others, that we've all faced that. Anxiety is prevalent in children and probably all of us. So I'll let you address that, Theopia. But even in the midst of all of this, every parent wants their child to be healthier, happier, to thrive, and not just survive, right? To thrive. That's what we're looking at. And they want them, you know, and I know, we want them to have more, be more, do more, live longer, just everything. Those are the wishes for children. So one thing just to think about, and then I'll wrap this up, but one particular thing. As pediatricians, we talk about SSNR. I don't know if you've heard about that. Safe, secure, nurturing relationship. SSNR, safe, secure, nurturing relationship. So I was thinking about that last night. Now, CDC has it up on their website, and guess what? They add an E to that. So safe, secure, nurturing relationship and environment. Now, you don't always see that piece. I thought I made that up last night, but when I looked, I did. So what we're talking about today is that environment. One more point. From the moment you wake up in the morning and to the moment you fall asleep, there are many ways climate impacts you and your family. That was part of what we talked about. It doesn't have to be hard, right? We are all in this together. And even people who are not so involved yet, families who are not so involved yet, when you ask them what they want for their children, they want them to be healthy, and they can't be healthy unless we're talking about what we're talking about today. So here's the question. How are the children? How are they now? And how are they in the future? And it's really up to us as advocates to make that. It's our responsibility and it's our opportunity to make a difference in their lives. Thanks, Lise.
Thank you, Fan. I was right when I was saying how grounding everything is that you touch, because what could be more fundamental, and this is what connects us to all of life, all of nature, and that is the taking care of our offspring, whether we're talking about the people or the animal world. Even plants take care of their babies. Some of you may know a book about trees and how trees nurture each other. So that connectivity to offspring is one of the most fundamental drivers of our lives and the sense of purpose. Thank you very much, Van, for underscoring that. And we will now move on to Sadiya. Sadiya, thank you for being here. Sadiya is the Director of Community Health at the Trust for Public Lands. She brings her commitment to the connection, to the ground that we stand on and the health that we need from being connected to the world of not only of nature, but to the community organizing that's required to bring our attention to preserving what, after a bit of time we might otherwise take for granted. So thank you, Sadiya. And with that, I will turn it over you to run with.
Great. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Lisa, and really honored to be among this range of panelists. Super excited about the conversation that we're about to embark on. From the perspective of the personal story of where this has really come from and why, from a person who's sort of worked in traditionally public health systems and healthcare, got involved in an conservation organization, it was pretty clear to me that the local was the global. I'm an immigrant. I grew up partially in India and, predominantly right here in Maryland. So not too far from you, Lisa. And found that over time, more and more, the news headings that I read were about flooding and disaster and challenges being faced in other parts of the world that I was very connected to, that where my family lived and would hope to thrive, of course, but that was really connected to the rest of the world. Right? Nature doesn't quite understand the geopolitical boundaries that we place in our land and our spaces. And that holds true for the context of the climate, and that holds true for coronavirus, right? And so as we think about these communities, we're often far more connected than we think. And in that conversation and in that space, professionally, as I think about public health, it really was about what is this underlying, under-recognized tool to promote well-being, to promote health equity and justice. And that really came down to green space, right? So ensuring that though it is often seen as a nice to have among these like very jargony terms that we use in public health called social determinants, that it's actually far more important. It is a need to have, and people need the land, as you said, Lisa, as co-collaborators in living in this space. And so that's really been my journey here with the Trust for Public Land as I transitioned from healthcare into sort of more conservation and green space world, that we really recognize green space and parks in particular in this relationship with people as a need to have.
Thank you, Sadiya, very much. And for the science nerds in the group, I'm sure many of you know already, and Sadiya, if she had more time, I'm sure would bring it up, but all the health benefits, cardiovascular benefits, the cognitive benefits, we have better memories, our immune system works better, our gut microbiome works better, everything works better when we are connected to nature. Shinrin-yoku, the Japanese movement out into the green, some of you may know about. And one last thing, and that is the addressing the issue of community, is that we now know from brain imaging that when we do things as a group, it activates not only our reward centers, but our opioid receptors, which make us have that feeling of bliss when we're working together. So a plug, yes, doing things individually is good. That's very important. But when we do it as a community, that's the magic sauce. Thank you, Sadiya. Dear Theopia, Theopia is the chair of Saybrook University Clinical Psychology program. She is also the president of the Association of Black Psychologists of America. She is, maybe she won't like me to say this, but silver-tongued, always having a deeper philosophic and embracing way of looking at things bringing people together. In the short time I've known her, have really grown to admire the quality of her thinking and her leadership. So Theopia, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you. And I so appreciate this invitation, Lisa. And I'm glad to be on this panel with such distinguished folks. And I'm actually quite surprised how I got here, why I'm here. So my story begins in that space and place. And first, let me do one slight correction. It is the Association of Black Psychologists. It's important to denote that, and it'll come up more in my story of how I came to be here. It's some of an indirect pathway here. I am what many would say an at-risk youth. I grew up in all those capacities in which someone would have the various markers for what denotes a child to be at risk. And I think that's important to hold on to, because many times we may not be explicit to share that, so that there's a negative messaging that can come about for people when they're constantly being told they're at risk, as opposed to understanding they're at potential in at-risk environments. Making that shift in terms of at-risk environments then says, so what's going on? So I would say I'm extremely happy, just like you, Fan, to see they add an environment onto there, because that is contextual. It also expands for me when I think about humanistic psychology, which is one of the Western psychologies I adhere to. They would always ask the question, what does it mean to be fully human? And yet, from this cultural perspective, I would say, what does it mean to be fully human within context? Because again, if we pay attention to that context, then we're looking in the setting in which people are living. My personal story also is one of which, coming up, I had no clue I was at risk. I grew up in an area that was impoverished, yet there was a fullness of love. There's a fullness of engaging with, now I would say, nature, but it wasn't told to me that way. We spent many a day out barefoot. To not be barefoot in the earth was just not to be thought of, if you will, as we still dealt with a number of different disparities and trauma. As I joined and became a clinical psychologist and focusing almost exclusively within pediatrics and family work, like most folks coming in to help those who've been hurting not to be hurt anymore. But as I continue to grow in this field under Western psychology, I recognized there were limitations for me, that the focus on the tools I was being trained in were limited. There was some benefits in being able to help that individual child in that therapy room, but there was a lot of limitations for me. I started thinking about what's going on in the context, the world in which they live and where they're sitting. So therefore, like any other good social science, I continued to do more research and was brought into the field of Black psychology under the Association of Black Psychologists. And to be explicit, this is not to the exclusion of anyone else. It is in the centering of, because particularly here in the United States, the storiedness of what it means to be Black before enslavement is just not told or understood. And also defining who we are goes far beyond in response to the structural racism and oppression that we've been dealing with. Instead, it is important to be on this discovery of what does it mean to be healthy and whole from an African-centered perspective. And that leads to worldviews. And one of those worldviews is this sense of collectiveness and interconnectedness with all that is living. I'm bringing this forward as part of the storiedness in the sense that as a Black psychologist, and the deeper I get into this work, I've always been doing this type of work. It just was not called climate change, right? Or the different titles that we may have to these spaces. So I'm surprised how, so I'm hoping in our conversation today that I can begin to contribute to how we can connect these dots so that there is a greater sense of this interplay, because I do think the language has been limiting us. 10, 20 years ago, if you said climate change to me, I did not have much capacity to hear that because I was deep in the continued, how do I deal with social justice, social injustice, racism? How do I promote a healthy sense of Blackness? And so it took a moment to begin to unpack that and see those connections. So I just offer that as an example. And before I turn over, I want to give one other example that brings me here in a personal way too, is as a member of the Association of Black Psychologists, we are also part of the All Healers Mental Health Alliance. The All Healers Mental Health Alliance is convened by Dr. Anel Prim, who is a Black psychiatrist. and it's made up of the leadership of a number of Black organizations. I submit to you that the All Healers Mental Health Alliance is almost like is doing climate change work, because we're focused on preparedness and recovery, and it grew after Hurricane Katrina hit, because we could intimately see in a more real-time way the complexities and the interplay between structural racism, oppression, and disparity. That community is still trying to heal, because one of the things that happens after we have these both human-made and nature-made events is that someone is the economic disparity, that we can't come back into our own communities, which then disrupts our centralness of being a full community, which is part of our health and healing. So I'll stop there. I'm excited about being able to contribute more to the conversation. And I'm more excited about learning more, because this is my first time in this space with ACL. And the talks I went to yesterday were phenomenal. I want to give a hats off to you for the level of diverse ways of thinking and being that's already embedded in this space. It's a model for other spaces. I'll just stop there. I'm just very excited.
Thank you, Theopia, and especially underscoring for us that words matter and terms matter, and how we think about ourselves is how we sometimes act in the world. And reliably, my experience with you is that you always deepen the conversation and you stretch us mentally and emotionally in so many different and important ways. And for you to say that ACL has been a model for this inclusiveness and this widening of the perspective, well, certainly you're one of the spokespersons. So thank you so very much. You always bring a greater depth and understanding to these complex issues. It's very much appreciated. So here we are, we've introduced ourselves, and we welcome any questions from anyone in the audience. We'd love to hear if you have a special interest that you want to direct at one of the speakers. Maybe get some an infusion of some advice, or even some vitality for something that's important to you, or maybe there's something you really don't understand and would like to hear a little bit more about. So I will ask a few questions first, and that is that very often when I've been on a panel like this and we're speaking extemporaneously, what happens is as soon as my turn is up, I think of that one critical thing that, I forgot to say whatever. And I get real antsy and can't find out how I can get my foot back in the door. So what I'm going to do is make it a little bit different this time. And instead of having to force that door open, why don't we go through the list again? What did you forget to say that you'd really like the audience to know? So should we start with Rich, or should we reverse the order? Maybe we'll start with Rich. We'll start with you, Rich.
We can reverse the order. We can reverse the order. And I appreciate that, Rich. I accept that in reversing the order. And Lisa, I want to appreciate you, because I kid you not, I was saying, I didn't say that. So, so let me just share what I wanted to offer here too that came up in the conversations is giving examples what I mean by cultural nuances and messaging. So I'm pretty sure that many of us on the call are familiar with this concept of it takes a village to raise a child. It's an African proverb that's been used in a number of different ways, but I'm not so sure we've had critical conversations about that. And so I want to position it to say that in the African wisdom, child is not limited to minors. Each of us on this call is somebody's child. So the term "it takes a village to raise a child" is a much more inclusive setting, and it means that we really are all in this together and we're doing this work together. So with permission, I want to build upon what Fan was saying, but invite us to look across the child, across the lifespan, right? And also, I want to add to what Fan was saying as well, too, when you talked about how are the children, I offer another greeting that comes from the Messiah tribe and learning, right? Which is, a Messiah tribe within the African tradition is one of the most known for their warrior skillship. They're the protectors. And when they meet each other, it's not how are you doing, how are you? They actually ask, and how are the children? And the asking of that question is not located to their biological relatedness. They're saying, how are the children in our space and place that we're responsible for? So what would our communities and our decisions look like? Where would climate change be if we started from that space? If all interactions, all laws that are passed are first critically asking, and how are the children? Because if we understand the impact on the village, on the people, then we will understand what we need to do to protect the earth, because they are one and the same.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's a very compelling message. Yes. So Sadiya, you are right there. You are. What's that one or two things that you thought to yourself afterwards, oh, I should have highlighted this?
Yes. So there's one thing that was from before our earlier introduction, and then a second thing just based off of what Theopia said. And so the first, I'll sort of start off with how important different stakeholders engaging in this conversation really is, right? In my public health mind, I'm thinking we are in a situation where 18% of our GDP goes into just healthcare costs, and we don't see the health outcomes that are related to that. It's growing faster than inflation. We have so much work to do in terms of making people, creating the environments together that make people healthier before they get to that 15-minute engagement with the doctor's office. And so what does that actually look like? What does that actually mean on the ground in communities? And that sort of relates to my second point, or second sort of comment, which is really around Theopia's question on how are the children? And it made me think of some of the work that my organization has done in Philadelphia. At the Trust for Public Land, we create parks and protect land for people. And one of those initiatives is around green schoolyards. So how are we bringing greening, green space, and those environments that support children in thriving into the space and place that they spend, upwards of 7 or 8 hours potentially, right? And in terms of how are the children, we've had sort of these anecdotal stories of parents gathering more once the playground was created, and they are talking more to each other so that the children can spend more time in that space. So you're building community. Principals are saying my suspensions rate, just plummeted to close to zero, because children have a place to thrive and a place to play. And we forget how important and how much of a privilege play is in our society. And so how do we think about how are the children in creating those environments? We can't do one, addressing all these public health issues, without doing the other. And that's really, I think, my, sort of key takeaway. It's community, it's green space, it's health all together.
Thank you, Sadiya. I'm going to ask a question that I'm sure the audience is thinking. Is there a place that people can go to find some of the metrics that are available on the impact of green spaces? Is there some place that you would especially recommend?
Sure. Richard mentioned the Children in Nature Network, our organization, Trust for Public Land, ppl.org. You can also find whether, your community, how it rates when it comes to its park score, and how the park environment is city by city. And so encourage you to visit those websites and check out that information.
And hold them up in front of your county, your city council.
Exactly.
Shaking them in the air. Thank you, Sadiya.
I'm sorry, if I may, because I think it fits here so beautifully. The other literature to tap into as well is the psychology of wellness, because everything that Sadiya just spoke about does in fact have a positive impact on one's mental health and wellness. So we have to pull from various disciplines to create a collective story for those politicians so they can see the intersectionality. It's not just funding mental health over there, or even we're looking at trying to, if we increase what Sadiya is speaking to, you will also see a correlate of less community violence because you're activating the community. The community is healthier, so it's better able to make more informed decisions, if you will. It feels more empowered. So again, beautiful example of connecting all of those dots for a collective package in messaging.
Thank you. Thank you, Theopia. The holistic view. Thank you for underscoring that. Fan, what did, on second thought, what did you leave out?
So first of all, I have to thank Theopia. I know that greeting, and I should have said that greeting of the Messiah. I think it's wonderful. And would that we didn't all ask that as a first question, wherever we go. So, okay, so one more thing. I guess one thing I was thinking about, Lisa, is in the midst of what families have been facing with COVID, all the things that we've talked about, they've also had their children at home. So they're working from home, they've had their children at home, they are worried about friends and family who have gotten COVID, they've lost, all of those things. This is not about COVID. But I think what it is about is don't add one more thing that I need to do right now from a family perspective. So we're actually not saying that. What we're saying is the things that you do every single day, every single minute, you can bring this in with your families, not adding more to you, not putting more responsibility. But think about it, set the example, turn the light off, plant a plant. There are so many things. And Lisa, you asked, so I will jump in on this. We have on healthychildren.org, which is free. It's one of our websites. There's actually a great article on there, and it's from Steph Lee, is the doctor, and it's how to talk to children about climate change. And it starts with toddlers, and it goes all the way up to the wonderful work that adolescents are doing. And it's how to talk to them, but it's what else to do. Well, so.
Thank you, Fan, very much. Rich.
Well, the thing I forgot to say is that to thank the people on this panel in terms of the movement that has emerged to connect kids and particularly but families and communities to nature over the last 15 years or so. And it's growing very quickly, and it's because of organizations like TPL and the American Academy of Pediatrics that more and more pediatricians are now literally prescribing nature. Sometimes they say recommending because prescribing is a controversial word to some, but that's been a remarkable change. And TPL has been working, long before I started writing about this to connect people to nature in urban areas and making sure they had some place to go. And Theopia, I'm sorry, I don't know that much about your organization, and I should, and I plan to find out more. I think that the most important, crucial mental health problem that we have in our culture right now is how we talk about the future. I've written a lot about this, that I think we've been trapped in a dystopian trance for decades, in which we become addicted to despair, just as we're addicted to oil and carbon. And that this slows down the movement to do something about climate change. It slows down all of the things that we want to do to protect nature and ourselves. Recently I've been writing about what I call imaginative hope. Let me say first, you remember last summer, I think it was or summer before maybe, when Australia was burning, and you saw these images coming out of Australia on the TV and on YouTube of the place was burning, the country was burning, and people who had just lost their own houses were getting on their bicycles and riding into the flames to bring water and food to the animals in those forests. Yet koalas climbing up people's legs when they're on their bikes so they could get the water. They were very moving images. It spoke well of our species. We don't see many things lately that speak well of our species, but that did. And there's an Australian eco-philosopher named Clint Albrecht, and he points out that the successful social movements, whether it's civil rights to a degree, feminism, the gay rights movement, and so forth, they're not based on data. They don't make their case primarily on data. And for a long time, the environmental community has really been trying to make its case based on numbers, the numbers of inches the sea rises and so forth. Science is essential, absolutely. But it doesn't move people from knowledge to action very often. And he points out, Glenn points out that these social movements that have moved people from knowledge to action have all been about relationship, about love. Where is the love in what we've been talking about in terms of our care for the earth? And can we talk about that more?
Yeah,
I think the Children in Nature movement is one of the things that expresses that love, that says that this is a relationship we have with the plants and the animals around us. And it's a relationship with the earth itself. And if we're not talking about love, we're not going to move people from knowledge to action anywhere near as quickly as we can.
I'm going to say that I well understand, and what Rich says makes so much sense, and I'm going to have to ask myself about being trapped in a dystopian despair. And I think what we well know is we've been with people who are Pollyannas on the one hand and say everything's going to be fine. And on the other end of the spectrum are the ones that are trapped into this darkness. And that place that we're looking for is that Goldilocks zone in the middle, where we do take all of these feelings and funnel them into what we can use to reasonably tell ourselves we are doing right by our offspring, our next generation, how are the children. So let me quickly, believe it or not, we're running out of time. It seems impossible, but we are. I'm going to get to two questions. We have 3 minutes. So whoever wants to take this, or I will look, someone has asked, there's a huge rate of burnout. How in the world do we get past that burnout to that place of resilience? Put your hand, does someone especially want to, yeah, go ahead, Theopia. You were the first to react.
I would welcome that question because I'd want to rephrase it in a different way. When we think about certain communities, and here I'm going to represent Black communities, it's not limited to them, but it's a model, that we've been dealing with seen and unseen pandemics for a very long time, and yet we still are here. So I think we're asking the wrong question. We need new questions. How do people still continue to be despite all they've been through? And that's coming from more of a strength-based place, because it may allow you to tap into what some scholars call vicarious resilience. Because if you enter into Black communities looking less like, oh, what's wrong with them and woe is them and I'm coming to save them, but enter instead as, how do I join the life force that already exists here? Then you too get wrapped up in it, and we should push back. And I'll close by saying there's a third group in your spectrum as well, Lisa, and that is the group of community wisdom, indigenous practices and wisdom that has been silenced. And so it's a time to lift all of that science back up and learn from, because it will explicate all that Richard and my colleagues here are promoting.
A wonderful point. Thank you for expanding our thinking. That's I think, a different way for many of us to look at these things, and certainly it's beneficial for me to hear that. I'm sure it's beneficial for the audience. We, believe it or not, we're down to 1 minute and 30 seconds. Van, did you have your hand up you did not. Okay. So in 1 minute, who can talk a little bit more about how we might recommend that as consumers of media, that we can urge storylines. How do we do that that are more hopeful? Who's got an answer to that question? Urging the media to talk about stories, success stories, really, because certainly we do get the hurricanes and the fires and the floods, but where are all the wonderful people that we can identify with that are putting up the solar panels on their roofs that they bought at Home Depot, that are making the vegetable gardens, that are taking their kids to the parks? Where are all those stories, and are they missing, and what do we do about it? And who can say it in 35 seconds now?
Lisa, when I talked about imaginative hope, what that means is not blind hope. It doesn't mean everything's going to work out just fine. Imaginative hope, as I would define it, is the ability to describe a world we want to go to. Martin Luther King demonstrated often and said that any movement, any culture will fail if it cannot paint a picture of a world we'll want to go to. His speech was not called "I Have a Nightmare." And that good news is out there. People are doing amazing things about climate change, often in unexpected corners. Indigenous people are doing really great projects that are a lot of times more interesting than the ones coming out of some of the universities. And all of those pieces are out there, but my profession of journalism seldom aggregates them, seldom puts them in one place so we can see there's a lot happening. And the imaginative hope aspect of this is we have to start imagining that world we want to go to. We have to start getting kids imagining that. We have to get the conservation organizations. It's not over until it's over. And we have to have a mental image, those images of what life could be like in cities and the countryside, and then go create those.
Rich, there, I'm getting the ding dong in my chat box. You can see all of Rich's books behind him. He's got, well, all of us, I think, or many on this panel have lots to say. You can find it in Rich's books. We're over time, but we really enjoyed being with you and having you ask us these very good questions, getting us thinking and hoping, and certainly committed to working together. So thank you very much. Thanks to the wonderful panelists. Thanks to Eco America for organizing this. Until next time. Thank you.